My baby dolls, we are back again. Another episode of Genesis coming up for you. As always, I am your host, Ian Kahanowitz, and it's great to be here today. You know, my Yankees had won the other day. They beat the Twins 8-4. I was kind of sweating it out in the first inning, but that's fine. So today we got the Boston Red Sox on against Houston. We got Cleveland and the Yankees on, and away we go with the 2017 postseason. We have a great show for you today, folks. We got a recurring, returning person, and any time anyone wants to return to my show, you got to be on it. We got Jerald Podair, and we're going to be talking about the Dodgers and the whole fight over Dodger Stadium. Wonderful written book, City of Dreams, and the birth of Modern Los Angeles. We're talking about Dodger Stadium, and, of course, we learned in the first episode all the stuff that went on in New York, and all the shortcomings of what happened with Walter O'Malley and Robert Moses, and then they moved. And the last we left off was with the council meeting and the motion that was just barely passed, and we're going to get into some of that. But before we do, you are listening to the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network with the Zigzag Man, Ralph Tycho, and we have a lot of good shows for you, as I always plug. Bill Kashadis. He's down in Philadelphia. He's doing Philly ball. We got Nancy Finley, niece of Charlie O. She does Oakland A's ball. We got Eldon Ham. He's covering things out in Chicago. We got Golenbach University with Peter Golenbach. He has his own show. We have Vintage Sports with longtime AP Sports writer Hal Bach, and he's on the show. The network's just growing. I'm honored to be here. My show does basically what every other show is to teach you folks something that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily hear when you turn on ESPN or ESPN Classic. The building of Dodger Stadium is something you should know. But even before we get there, this network, on behalf of the network, I'm sending out all my prayers and support to the folks at the Las Vegas shooting. Horrible tragedy. The worst, killing spree in the United States ever. As an attorney, I can honestly say that if he did survive, chances are he might have pled insanity and won because it is this devastating. And I always say accountants and lawyers, they're nuts because I'm both. And when you deal with numbers and when you deal with taxes, this guy had 4 houses, Filipino girlfriend, money to spend. The only thing I can't figure out is motive, why you would do it, and all I can say from my experience is once you get into people's taxes and you actually understand the tax code, you become a little nuts yourself. And as a tax lawyer, I can tell you right now, not many people understand the tax code, and reading it's like reading Greek, and it can make you nuts. But on another sad note, we have Tom Petty, one of my heroes. I keep posting every day on Facebook and Twitter my, celebration of his life and his music, and that really hurt me because for 35 years I followed Petty since 1982. He was about 6 years into his career. I saw the video You Got Lucky with that spaceship and the old Western stuff, and I was hooked ever since then. Saw him 10 times in concert, and of course, many people know he's from Gainesville, Florida, but his favorite city when he went out there was Los Angeles, and that's where we're going to head today. And Mr. Podair, he is a professor, and he's a professor up in Appleton, Wisconsin, of all places, and I just spoke with him regarding about life up there. And he's near Green Bay, and told me a lot of the Green Bay players stay in the hotel around the area, and it's a nice place to live, if you can make it up there. He's at Lawrence, professor of American Studies at Lawrence University in Appleton. He is a recipient of the Allen Evans Prize, awarded by the Society of American Historians for literary distinction in the writing of history. And, of course, most of you know I have my master's in history, too. He is the author of this book, City of Dreams, Dodger Stadium, and the Birth of Modern Los Angeles. He has a few other books that he had written in the past, and I am honored to always have him on the show. And welcome to the show, Jerald.
It's great to be here, Ian. Green Bay and Appleton are wonderful places, but not in February.
Well, it's same as like Boston. The damn thing's like tundra. I'm surprised I'm surprised the Charles River doesn't freeze over.
Doesn't freeze over every year. Yeah.
I remember when the East River froze in the late 70s in New York. I was a little kid, and the Daily News just showed it. And it froze over. It was that cold. And
out here in Wisconsin, most water freezes pretty early on in the winter.
Yeah. Well, you got nice hunting up there. It's absolutely gorgeous, I hear, like God's country. In the spring, it's like Emerald City up there. It's all green.
It is. In the spring and summer, it's really delightful, and the people are very friendly, very down to earth. No egos, unlike certain places in the East that you and I are aware of. So it is a very nice place to live, except it gets very cold during the winter.
Yeah, well, I could handle the cold. It's not, except now that I have arthritis and, my feet with like 7 surgeries with all the hardware put in, it literally feels that cold in the winter. My hands literally.
Oh, yeah. That would be difficult here.
Yeah. So, it's just one of those things. Hey, listen, Walter Malley, he had to run 4 bases to get to Dodger Stadium. The first base, he had to get that, motion, which we'll talk about in a second, getting past. The second base he had to run was the referendum. The third base, he had to go to court. And the fourth base is when the Supreme Court of the United States denied the case. But let me step back to what we finished up on the last time. First of all, I want people to get a sense on what was going through the council's mind regarding the division. Where did most people fall? Who felt like? Where did the Mexican Americans fall? Where did white America fall in this council meeting?
Well, this is a very divided council and a very divided city as it takes up the Dodger contract in early October 1957. And that's what really drew me to this subject in the first place. As a New Yorker, I had, the myth of the Dodgers' move was that once they left New York, everything was very easy for Walter O'Malley in Los Angeles, and it's turned out to be the exact opposite. I think it was even more difficult for him to get his stadium built in Los Angeles than it might have been even if he stayed in New York. So in October 1957, you have some clear divisions, not only on the city council, but within the city itself about this contract. And the issue is, do we allow a private entrepreneur, Walter O'Malley, access to public land at what certainly the opponents of this deal felt was a overly favorable deal? In other words, can a private stadium, Dodger Stadium, be viewed as a public purpose and be the beneficiary of public funds and public resources? So to divide the city down the middle, the people in favor of the deal are people connected with the Los Angeles downtown establishment, and these are mainly Republicans, business-oriented Republicans, and the leader of that faction is the mayor of the city, Norris Paulson, and he is in favor of the deal. Then you have people who live on what's known as the west side of Los Angeles, which is out closer, near Beverly Hills, near Hollywood, away from downtown, largely liberal, largely Jewish, and they are in favor of the deal. They think it will help Los Angeles, help it become a large world-class city. And the spokesman for that group is Rosalind Wyman, who is the city councilwoman from that district, and she favors the deal. Now, African Americans in Los Angeles also favor the Dodger Stadium deal, largely out of loyalty to Jackie Robinson and to the Dodger franchise generally. As we all know, the Dodgers brought Jackie Robinson to the major leagues in 1947, and so the Los Angeles African American community is very Dodger-oriented. And, of course, it also helps that Jackie Robinson is originally from Pasadena, so he is a hometown guy. So they have support there too. There's also support for the contract to build the stadium among the labor unions, most of the labor unions in Los Angeles, especially, as you might imagine, the construction trades, because this is going to bring in a huge amount of business and a huge amount of opportunities for employment for their members. So labor is also in favor of this deal. Now, the Latino community is much more divided and much more complicated. Latinos in Los Angeles are great baseball fans, and over the years, I've always said they are the most loyal fan base for the Dodgers in Los Angeles, Latinos. Sometimes, whites and others come and go. Latinos stick with the Dodgers. So they are great Dodger fans, and most Latinos were very happy when the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles. They were not happy, however, when they learned that the site for the stadium would be the Chavez Ravine area, because that is the home, or was the home, of a traditional Mexican-American community that was going to be uprooted. Well, it had already been uprooted, and we can get to that, for a public housing project in the early 1950s. So much of the community had been basically evicted, but there were still a number of families still living in the Chavez Ravine area in 1957, and it was clear that they were going to have to move as well. So the Latino community was divided. I would say split over this question of the contract. But the real base of the opposition to this contract came from what I refer to in my book as the folks. And that's not my phrase. The great California historian Kevin Starr coined that phrase, and I thought it was quite apt. So with credit to Kevin Starr, I used it in my book. Now, who are the folks? The folks are white Protestants who are either migrants from the Midwest. Los Angeles had a tremendous influx of migrants from the Midwest in the 20s, 30s, and the 40s, to work in the aerospace and defense industries, or their children. So these are migrants from the Midwest. They're Protestants. They are culturally conservative. They are politically conservative. They don't like spending money. They don't like high taxes, and they are opposed to this deal because they feel it's in their view a giveaway of public property to the Dodgers. So these and they're small homeowners, they're small businessmen, they're what we might call if this was in the late 1960s, they're the silent majority, and there are a lot of them. They are not interested in downtown. They live on the peripheries. They live on the margins. They live in the suburbs. They live in the outskirts of the city. Many of them live in the San Fernando Valley, which is separated from the rest of Los Angeles, by hills and mountains, and feels very, very cut off from downtown. There are people who live, these folks who live on the outskirts of L.A., who have maybe been downtown once or twice in their lives, so they don't care about a stadium for the downtown area. With, Chavez Ravine is right on the lip of downtown. It overlooks downtown. It might as well be part of downtown. So these folks are definitely the kinds of people who will say, why are we spending money on downtown? Why are we spending money or resources on a baseball stadium? Why don't we spend those resources, in our neighborhoods, on the outskirts, on streets and schools and roads and police protection, the everyday functions of the city? So they don't have a tremendous amount of civic vision the way the supporters of the stadium do. And the spokesman for the folks in this stadium battle is a councilman named John Holland, who served for a very, very long time in the council, very, very conservative, very, very taxpayer-oriented, and he was basically the main spokesman against this deal. And then to round it out, I mentioned that the Latino community was divided. The Latino councilman on the council at this time is a man named Edward Roybal, and he later goes on to become a very successful congressman for like 30 years, and very powerful congressman in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But before this, he's a councilman. He is the first Latino councilman city councilman in the 20th century in Los Angeles. Now, from our perspective, that seems to be almost unbelievable that, until the 1950s you would not have a Latino councilman in that city, but it was, as I mentioned, a very Protestant, very white Protestant city at that time. So Roybal is really torn because he wants the Dodgers in L.A., but he is very concerned about that stadium being at Chavez Ravine. And what Roybal ends up doing as the City Council of Los Angeles prepares to vote on this contract for the Dodgers, where they're going to get this Chavez Ravine land. It's going to be a land swap, the deal, a land swap for property that O'Malley owned elsewhere in the city, which actually was called Wrigley Field, not Chicago Wrigley Field, but Los Angeles Wrigley Field. He owned it as a minor league stadium. And basically the deal was going to be the city would swap the Chavez Ravine land to O'Malley for the property at Wrigley Field, which is elsewhere in the city. So Roybal, the Latino councilman, he wants the Dodgers in the city, but he's very nervous about the Chavez Ravine part because he knows there's going to be conflict there because the remaining families are going to be removed. So he is not in the council, on the council floor when this vote takes place. He basically abstains by absenting himself. But after the deal gets approved, he becomes an opponent of it. So he represents a very divided constituency, Roybal does, but the constituency, the Latino constituency, as positive as they are about the Dodgers, they are very emotional about the removal of those remaining families from Chavez Ravine, and we'll get to that story a little later. So that's the deal.
Now that's interesting because in the council, before we even get to referendum, Proposition B, there was a contentious debate. There was a telephone bomb threat, and there was 3 undecided council members who reluctantly agreed. By the slimmest of margins, it passed. Now let me ask you this: did you get a chance to interview Rosalind Wyman?
I did. She is the only remaining councilwoman or a member of that council who's still around. All the others are gone. But I did get a chance to interview her.
Now let me ask you this. Now, a lot of people don't know her about her, but I want to just stress the importance of her. First of all, she was the one at 23 years old, and she's still alive. She's 85, I think.
Yeah, late 80s now, yeah.
Yeah, she was the one who literally loved the sports and, wanted the Dodgers. And how instrumental was she to get this through the council?
She was absolutely essential. Without Ros Wyman, there are no Dodgers in Los Angeles. I think it's as simple as that. And, sometimes history has its quirks and ironies, and I've always felt that if Robert Moses back in New York were a baseball fan, which he was not, he hated spectator sports, the Dodgers would be possibly still playing in Brooklyn. Now, Ros Wyman, as it happens, was a huge baseball fan from way back. And even when she initially ran for the city council at the age of 23, it's amazing, in 1953, one of her platform planks was, we want a major league team in Los Angeles. In those days, those very quaint days of political campaigning, Ros Wyman went door to door in her council district and knocked on doors and just sat down with people and talked to them about, her candidacy. So that's a very different time. So back to 1957. It's October 7th, 1957, and this contract with the Dodgers, the city and the Dodgers, to give them the land at Chavez Ravine in exchange for Wrigley Field, is on the table, and it's going to be voted on. And there's a tremendous amount of strife within the council. John Holland, who I mentioned is the representative of the folks, vehemently against this contract. He's basically almost filibustering it on the floor of the council. And what happens is the mayor, Norris Paulson, who is for the contract, calls up Walter O'Malley back on Long Island, and he says, Walter, we're about to vote here. Can you promise that you will come to Los Angeles if we pass this contract? And at some point in the conversation, Paulson says to Wyman, who's in the room, you talk to him. So Wyman gets on the phone with O'Malley and basically asks him the same question. Are you going to come if we pass this thing? Because it's going to be very close. If it's going to pass, it's going to pass by one vote. And O'Malley is still not really sure whether he wants to do this. I think the enormity of it, the magnitude of it, is finally hitting him. This is a guy who is a New Yorker through and through. He has spent very little time outside New York in his life. He has only visited Los Angeles 3 times in his entire life for less than 10 days. He is very unfamiliar with the city, and at this point, he's almost like saying, I'm at the precipice here. Do I want to jump? So he's rather vague with Wyman. He doesn't give her a definitive answer as to whether he's going to come, even if they do pass this contract. So she goes back to the floor of the council, and if Holland had asked the direct question as he's filibustering, Councilwoman Wyman, I know that you've been in contact with Walter O'Malley. I have not. Has he given you his assurance that if we pass this contract, he will move the Dodgers to L.A.? If he had asked that question, Wyman would have had to say, honestly, I just got off the phone with him, and he has not given me that absolute assurance. In my view, had that question been asked, the contract would have failed because other wavering voters would have said, we're not going to pass this contract unless he says, absolutely, I will come, because otherwise there's egg on their faces. They look stupid, okay? But the question is never asked. I would imagine that Wyman's heart is racing as they finish up the debate and prepare to vote, praying that someone, maybe John Holland, is going to ask that question. Well, is he going to come? And he never asks the question. And I've always felt that, history is filled with these might-have-beens, these moments, these contingencies that could go either way that sometimes you can't even explain. Because Holland afterwards was asked, well, did you know this? Why didn't you ask the question? And his answer was, it just never occurred to me to ask the question. And sometimes history turns on these moments that you can't even explain. So Holland never asks the question, and they go to the vote, and it's a 10-4 vote in favor of the contract. You need 2/3 in the L.A. City Council. So the contract to trade Chavez Ravine to the Dodgers for the Wrigley Field property goes through on October 7th, 1957, and then the next day O'Malley makes the announcement in New York that the Dodgers are moving.
And to show how instrumental Roz was, I'm going to give a footnote here. When Dodger Stadium was finally complete, O'Malley invited her to dinner at the ballpark, and O'Malley held 2 master keys to every door in Dodger Stadium. And when he died, one of them went to Roz.
Exactly. They became friends and were lifelong friends until O'Malley's death in 1979, and she still remains very friendly with the O'Malley family. I was actually able to go to her home and interview her through the courtesy of the O'Malley family who knew her. A lot of times when you're working on a book, it is very hard to get people to talk to you. They either don't have the time or they don't want to revisit things in the past. So it's not always easy to get interview subjects. But she was absolutely, I think, if you want to put your finger on one person who was most responsible for getting that contract passed and eventually getting the stadium built, it would be Roz Wyman and also Norris Paulson, the mayor as well. It helps to have public officials who are baseball fans. Paulson was a baseball fan, too.
Well, let me ask you this question. It's interesting that you mentioned that some of the things, like, he never asked the question, in Congress. It's so similar to what happened 10 years before when D-Day occurred and the Allies hit the beaches at Normandy in France. Hitler was sleeping at the time from a barbiturate. He had to go to sleep because Rome had fallen the previous day.
Right. So he's up half the night, worrying about what's happening in Rome, thinking that he knows the attack in France is coming, but he thinks it's coming somewhere else. So he is completely unprepared, for that. I mean, these moments in history, during the Battle of Gettysburg, Robert E. Lee was ill. I mean, he was not so ill that he was incapacitated, but he was ill, and he was not necessarily making the best decisions that you would expect from, a general of the caliber of Robert E. Lee. So sometimes these moments are at the start of World War I, the incident that precipitated it, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary. His car took a wrong turn. He ended up 10 feet from an assassin when he was supposed to be somewhere else because his driver took a wrong turn. And these are the things that happen in history. You can't say that anything is inevitable. You can't say that all these grand forces are more important than individuals, because if the car turns the wrong way, or Robert E. Lee feels a little better, or Hitler is not on barbiturates, history changes. Or if the question on the floor of the council is asked and it's not asked.
You see how I tie it all in? You're a history, professor, just like me. You love history. Now let me ask you this: if O'Malley, and this is going to segue into Proposition B and then the court cases.
Right.
If O'Malley, first of all, let me ask this question: was O'Malley aware of what needed to happen here between the councilmen and Proposition B?
He was not only unaware of Proposition B. I mean, he knew that the council was voting on the contract on October 7th. That he knew. And I think he knew that it was going to be a close vote. But as far as the referendum is concerned, not only is he not aware of the referendum, he is not even aware that California has a referendum mechanism, because back in New York, there is no real referendum mechanism. He doesn't, he understands New York politics, but he really doesn't understand L.A. politics. So when he gets off the plane in late October, the Dodgers, sort of fly to Los Angeles for this gala welcome, and when he gets off the plane, two things happen. First, he's served with process in a taxpayer lawsuit where, and we'll get to the lawsuit, where individual taxpayers in L.A. are suing against the contract. And second, he's told that there's a petition drive underway to get the contract question on the ballot as a referendum. And he says, what is that? What is a referendum? You mean that this contract can be overridden by a vote of the voters of Los Angeles? And he said, yeah, that's California progressivism. There are referendums, there are recalls, as we know. And he says, no, they didn't have any of this in New York. Also, nobody told me about this. He didn't know even about, he knew that he wanted to be at Chavez Ravine, but he didn't even really know that there were still families remaining at Chavez Ravine and that this was going to be a problem. So, when people say that O'Malley planned to move to Los Angeles all along, my response is that this is usually a very meticulous planner. He's very organized. He doesn't do things, by the seat of his pants. And if he had planned to move all along, he would have done a lot more research than he did, because he seems to be surprised by a lot of the things he encounters in L.A. And what that says to me is that New York was his first choice pretty much up until the end. And then he just realizes that it's not going to work in New York, and L.A. is definitely a plan B. It's not a plan A.
And that's exactly the answer I wanted to get out of you, that O'Malley did not know. Now, let me ask you this. If he knew, if he had a crystal ball, if he was aware of California politics, council, referendum, not to mention moving up to the referendum, you got a few things going on, a couple of taxpayers' lawsuits, and then you win the referendum, and then you got to go to court, and then you got to go appeal it. And so if he would have known this and the fight that he would have had to endure, would he have moved to Los Angeles?
I don't think he would have. I think if he actually knew what lay in front of him and how close this was going to be, He had one vote to spare on the city council. He ends up winning the referendum, not to get ahead of our story, but by 2 percentage points. He gets the contract shot down by a trial court in Los Angeles County, and has to go all the way up to the California Supreme Court, and then finally to the U.S. Supreme Court. They didn't take the case, so he won. If he had known that he was going to have to do that, plus go through the trauma of the evictions of the Mexican American families from Chavez Ravine, if he knew all of that was in front of him, and that the stadium was going to cost more than he thought it was going to cost, and he was going to have to pay the bill, I don't think he would have moved. I think he might have tried to use L.A. as a bargaining chip in New York, but I think he would have realized that he was going to have to somehow make it work in New York. So my feeling is that if he had known all this, he would not have moved.
Now we're moving into the referendum, and this is probably the most important chapter of the whole book, because what you are seeing here is you're seeing Baus and Ross produce literature, and these were the guys that were on the Taxpayers Committee, and they were opposing the Citizens Committee, and you had to have literally like a whole election coming up. It's like they were just tapering the town with literature. The Dodgers had nothing to do with it. They figured, look, we're not going to be there. Let the folks decide. What's going on here?
Well, what goes on here is that this referendum campaign becomes just like any other major political battle, only two candidates aren't running against each other. Yes and no are running against each other. Yes on the contract or no on the contract. And two groups of citizens basically formed around each side of that issue. On the no side of the issue, there was a group called the Citizens Committee to Save Chavez Ravine for the People, and the title of that committee sort of gives its purpose away. They wanted to void the contract and stop the Dodgers from taking that Chavez Ravine land. On the other side, you have the Taxpayers Committee for Yes on baseball, and obviously that is a committee that is pro-contract. Now, the Dodgers stay out of it, so what that means is, at least they stay out of it publicly, what that means is that basically the citizens of Los Angeles, with their votes and also with their money, get to decide what's going to be on this contract. Now, what the Taxpayers Committee has, their advantage is they have a lot more money. Hollywood is really, or the Hollywood actors and movie stars are really getting behind the yes part of the contract. Virtually every movie star in Hollywood was a Dodger fan and was in favor of this contract. So the Taxpayers Committee, the pro-contract side of this, was able to get up enough money to hire a public relations firm called Baus and Ross, as you mentioned, Ian, and they are instrumental in selling baseball as a political public relations campaign to the city of Los Angeles. That this is a good thing for the city, that is going to bring in jobs, that is going to bring in prestige, that to the city is going to make it a world-class city, that the Dodgers are going to build this stadium on their own, which means they're going to pay property taxes, unlike a municipal stadium. So the city tax coffers are going to grow, or the county tax coffers are going to grow, and they basically blanket the city with material and with arguments in favor of this contract. Now, to our ears, this seems rather unexceptional because this is how every political campaign works today. But in the 1950s, this was very new. To hire a public relations firm, or a political public relations firm like Baus and Ross to do this for you, and it's my view that if it wasn't for Baus and Ross, that this campaign would have been unsuccessful. Now, on the other side, it's much more disorganized, the no side. They don't have a lot of money. They don't have a lot of publicity. They have virtually no newspaper ads, which the yes side on the referendum had. But what they do have is just a lot of people in Los Angeles, these folks, there are a lot of them, who are just not happy with this contract. And so, you would think that if one side has a lot of money and the other side is not all that well financed, that the side with the money is going to win and win by a lot. But this is not the case here. This is a very, very close election that was pretty much undecided until the wee hours of the morning. It takes place on June 3rd, 1958. Even on June 4th, it was still not clear who had won this referendum. So while Balsan Ross is essential to getting this message out and selling it through all sorts of modern communications techniques, they have a telethon known as Dodgerthon right before the referendum, where Hollywood stars come out, and there's a picture of that in my in my book where William Frawley and who played Fred on I Love Lucy and was a big star at the time, and Danny Thomas are supporting the contract on the air. Ronald Reagan is supporting the contract on the air. So you have all this publicity generated by this public relations firm, and on the other side, the no side, you just have a lot of angry people. And what happens is you have a very close election.
And let me ask you this question. Do you think by all the publicity and the money that was spent, because Balsan Ross outspent the opposition probably 2-1, do you think that helped them pass the referendum?
Oh, I think it definitely did. You need to get your message out. And what Balsan Ross was doing, these are pros here. They know what they're doing. They're organizing committees of certain other individuals, like the lawyers, the accountants, the doctors, the oil executives, and they're organizing all these subcommittees. And they're basically appointing one person or two people at the very head of each of these subcommittees. And their jobs is go out into your field, go out into your profession, we'll give you the literature, we'll give you the arguments, have meetings to sell this contract. And that is very, very effective and very organized. So they have it top to bottom. On the top end, they have all these celebrities who people can see in Los Angeles who, say, pass this contract. On the bottom end, they have, on the ground level, they have people in your own profession. Let's say you're a banker or you work for a bank. Well, you get a call from someone else that you know who works for another bank and says, hey, I'm head of this subcommittee to pass this stadium contract. We're going to have a meeting and we're going to have a Hollywood celebrity talk there, so why don't you come? And that becomes very, very effective. So you hit them on the top and you hit them on the bottom. And in opposition, the opposition to this contract, they had numbers, but they didn't have money, or a lot of it, and they didn't have an organization. And also, they're selling what may be a losing product because, well, if you're a voter, you have a choice. Do you want the Dodgers in a new stadium in your city, or do you want to risk losing them? Well, if you vote no, you're going to risk losing them because, O'Malley, during this campaign, he basically tries to stay out of it. But when he does speak, he is sort of oblique. He says, we want to stay here, we will stay here, but I can't promise anything because the National League may move us if this stadium deal collapses. The National League can pretty much control where the Dodgers play, and it's possible that the National League, if this referendum fails, if the contract fails, will say you got to get out of L.A. And what happens also right before the referendum vote in June of 1958 is that Warren Giles, who's the president of the NL, National League, issues a statement saying, well, the voters of L.A. had better come through here and approve this contract because if they don't, I may not have any choice here. They need a place to play, and the Dodgers may have to leave Los Angeles. So that, I think, is helpful as well in terms of getting the people to vote. But as it turns out, even with all of this, even with Balsan Ross, even with the Dodger telethon, even with what Warren Giles says, and even with the positive sentiment for the team in being in the city, the referendum is really close. It is decided by 25,000 votes out of about 675,000, and it works out to 51-49 in favor of the contract. So it is really close, and they don't even know who's won basically until the next day. So it shows how divided this city was, that this referendum passed by such a thin margin. And again, after the council vote, he made it by one vote. The referendum vote, O'Malley makes it by 2 percentage points. This is very, very close.
And that's where we're going to have to end our inquiry today because time is running on us. But I'm just going to say one thing. I got the actual numbers here. There were 15 districts. From the absentee voting, I mean, even in the no people won. For the absentee, 3,299 people voted yes, 4,174 voted no. But overall, the grand total, you had 351,683 in favor, and you had 325,898 against. Huge victory, but slimmest of margins, which means
incredibly slim. And if you notice, Ian, you mentioned the absentee ballots; those are cast before the actual vote. So what I think is that's a gauge of where the public was about 2 weeks before the election, which means that since the absentee ballots went to no on the contract, it's possible that if this referendum had been held in May rather than in early June, it would have lost.
That's right. That's what I was thinking, too, because the indicators with the absentee ballots show that it was leaning towards a no. And to win it by 2%, I mean, it's just, like you said, you just can't know about history and the little nuances that, show what can happen in history. We're going to get you back because I didn't get to the court cases, and I love it. I love the fact. I love it. I love that you're on the show and that we're talking about this, and people are going to learn so much about it because I do. I even learn more about it talking to you than with your book. So we'll get you on the show probably in November, probably in December. If you want to do both, we'll do both. We'll plug this book. Hang on a second. Let me end the show. Folks, this is a great book. You can see all the political squabbling going on in Los Angeles. Again, history hinges upon the most nuance of things. It's not, a clear, decisive thing that you could read, in a history outline or something like that. You really got to get into the meat and potatoes. Get this book, City of Dreams, Dodger Stadium, and the birth of Modern Los Angeles. Great book. You get to learn a lot. As always, I'm Ian Kahanowitz, and from the Comfortably Zoned Network, and thank you, Jerald Podair, for being on the show today. In the immortal words of Edward R. Murrow, good night, folks. Good luck. We'll see you next time. Enjoy the playoffs.